Hi guys, Olive here today to discuss all things Alice in Wonderland. For whatever reason, I never read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll as a kid, and I also had never gone back and read it as an adult, which I have done with other children's classics that I missed out on when I was a kid. I had never done that, but I did it finally this month. I had an inspiration for doing so, which I will discuss a little bit later. But all in all, I read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I read its sequel, Through the Looking Glass. I rewatched the 1951 animated Disney film, and I read an Alice in Wonderland retelling of sorts. All of these things I want to discuss in this video. So first, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is an 1865 novel that was written by Charles Dodgson, and it was published under his pseudonym Lewis Carroll. It is a fantasy novel all about a young girl named Alice who follows a mysterious talking rabbit down his rabbit hole, which leads her to the very strange world called Wonderland, which is populated by some very odd creatures indeed. The book is considered to be an example of quintessential literary nonsense, which is just about as difficult to define as you would expect it to be. You kind of just need to know it when you read it. The story doesn't really go anywhere, nothing really makes sense. It's just kind of a series of random happenings. When I was considering reading this book finally, that's honestly the thing that concerned me the most about it. In case you don't know anything about me, I am a very logical, married to reality kind of person, so I worried that this wouldn't be my cup of tea. I worried that I had missed the boat by not reading this as a kid. But surprisingly, I really enjoyed these books. I think my favorite things about them were all the interesting plays on words. Lewis Carroll appeared to really enjoy playing with the way a word sounded versus its meaning in our world. So in these magical worlds that he created and threw Alice into, those words would have an entirely different meaning and they would be based on the way the words literally sounded. But it turns out that Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is a whole lot less random and nonsensical than I thought going into these books and honestly coming out of these books. But I only know that because after I read both the first and the second books, I remembered that there are these editions of the classics, editions of classic books called the annotated editions. I know they exist because I checked out the annotated Little Women from the library a couple of years back. I ended up having to return that before I finished Little Women, unfortunately. I remember loving that edition of Little Women. I was so sad when I had to return it to the library. Someone else had a hold on it. I remember thinking that someday I would have to buy my own copy of it. And I was so intrigued by that concept, the idea that I would have these annotations that would give me more information about the story, about the author, things that I wouldn't have known just from reading the text itself. I looked up to see if there were other books like it. And it turns out there were. There were actually a number of these different editions for a lot of different children's classics, like The Secret Garden, Peter Pan, and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I have a dream of owning physical copies of all of those annotated editions someday in the distant future, because not only are they gorgeous, I think they would look gorgeous on a shelf, but also they're such valuable resources. There's so much information in those books. I thought about starting that collection with the annotated Alice because I knew I wanted to do a video like this and I thought it would be helpful to have all that extra information. But instead, I downloaded the ebook just for the sake of time. It's a whole lot faster downloading a book onto my Kindle rather than waiting for a rather heavy book to be delivered to me in the mail. And when I sat down to read it, I read in the introduction by Martin Gardner that there's probably not another children's book out there that needs an introduction as badly as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland does, because there are so many references, inside jokes. There's so much information nestled within the text that a modern reader wouldn't have a chance of understanding. Right away, the annotated Alice gives a lot of good historical information about this time period, about Charles Dodgson, and about the inspiration behind Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. How it came to be. It turns out that Alice was a real little girl. Her name was Alice Little, and she had a friendship of sorts with Charles Dodgson. It turns out that the man behind Lewis Carroll had a fascination with little girls. One could say that he was kind of obsessed with them and everything they represented in Victorian society. Apparently, this wasn't all that uncommon back then, and there's nothing to suggest, there is no concrete evidence to suggest that anything improper was going on there. But it's still kind of weird. But because he wrote this book about Alice Little for Alice Little, he includes references and inside jokes that only she would have gotten, and then there are additional references that only someone living in Oxford during this time period would have understood. The annotations sprinkled throughout this edition will give you that historical context that you so much need to be able to understand big parts of this book. They'll give you biographical details about the man behind Lewis Carroll, and they'll also discuss the origins of a number of the different characters throughout the first book, because it turns out that Alice isn't the only character based on someone who actually lived. If I could change anything about my first read through of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, I wish I would have read the annotated edition first. It's not that I didn't enjoy just reading the straight up text and then going back to consult the annotations later and pick up more information later, but I think if I would have had it for that first read through, it would have been a whole lot richer. So if you're looking for a place to start, or if you're looking for a fun option for a reread, I highly recommend it. I only wish that this edition covered both books in the Alice series, I guess you could call it, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and its sequel, Through the Looking Glass. Through the Looking Glass is not included in this book. There is only a very small, unpublished piece of it that's included at the end, but the work as a whole isn't covered. And I do think it's pretty important to have read both of them if you're going to understand Alice as a pop culture phenomenon. And the reason why I say that is largely because the 1951 animated Disney classic draws upon both of those books, and it actually combines elements of both books in really effective ways, I think, anyway. For example, the idea of the unbirthday appears in the second book, not the first, and it actually has nothing to do with the Mad Hatter and March Hare in the book series. But since I mentioned the March Hare, let me quickly talk about my inspiration behind making this video and my inspiration for picking up Alice's Adventures in Wonderland for the very first time. As you know, it's a new month. It's the month of March, and I have a new candle to show you. If you didn't already know this, I happen to know the owner of a literary-themed candle company that's located here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's a small business here in Pittsburgh, and the owner's name is Amanda. We met by accident a couple years ago, and we've stayed in touch. In addition to her large catalog of amazing literary candles, every single month Amanda puts out a new limited edition candle that you can only buy for that month. And this month, that candle is based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and it's very appropriately called The March Hare. Now that I've read both books and I know how much wordplay there is in both of them, I can't tell you how perfect it is that this is March's candle of the month. The scent of this one is vanilla cake with lemon and raspberry, almost as though you're going to an Alice in Wonderland themed tea party. Like all of her candles in this specific size, when you first receive it, you'll notice that there are one or more charms sitting on top of the wax. This is what they look like in my candle. I've already taken them out of mine because I wanted to burn it for a little while to actually be able to review it and tell you what it smells like. They're very easy to get out. You just burn it for about 15 minutes and then they come right out. When I first heard what the scent of this one was going to be, I was over the moon because first of all, I'm obsessed with lemons. I don't know why, but I love lemon, anything and everything. And raspberries are one of my favorite fruits. And then on top of those two things, any cake I've ever bought from a fancy bakery, whether it be a birthday cake or even the small wedding cake that my husband and I got after we got married at City Hall, we got ourselves a cake that we could just have together. Every single cake I've ever ordered has been vanilla cake with raspberry filling. So this kind of seemed made for me. And just like all of Amanda's candles, it's really, really great. The lemon and the raspberry are the dominant scents. They are definitely more powerful scents, especially right away when you start burning it. But once you've let it burn for a little while, the sweetness of that cake definitely comes through. And when it fills a room, it is so inviting. If I were able to host a tea party right now, which I so wish I could, I would absolutely burn this candle in the room where I was hosting it. So if you want this one, it'll be available through the end of March 2021. Although Amanda did tell me that she makes this her candle of the month every single March. So if you're finding this video later on, there might still be a chance you can get your hands on one. The link to where you can buy one of these will be in the description box below. And I should note that this video is not sponsored. I do not receive any kind of a commission if you buy one of these candles. However, I did get this candle for free for reviewing purposes. But I do have one final Alice in Wonderland inspired thing to discuss with you before I wrap up this video, and that's the book After Alice by Gregory Maguire, who is the author of Wicked. I've actually never read Wicked, but I did read his Russian folktale inspired book Egg and Spoon, which was pretty good. When I was reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland for the very first time earlier this month, I remembered having seen the cover of this book. I remember seeing it and being intrigued by it back when it was released, maybe in 2015, I think it was. But I knew back then that I didn't have an immediate interest in reading it because I hadn't read the source material. Well, that wasn't true as of very recently, so I decided I would finally give it a try, especially because I was really interested to see whether or not it deserved that awful 2.8 average rating on Goodreads. I thought to myself, could it possibly be that bad? And my answer now, after having read After Alice, is no, I don't think it deserves such a bad rating. I'll say that this is an Alice in Wonderland retelling or reimagining because I'm not quite sure I have a word for what this book actually does. This book is much more about what's happening while Alice is in Wonderland. So it's kind of the story that takes place around the central Lewis Carroll tale. So it's almost like the shell of that story. And instead of following Alice, we follow 3 different women also living in Oxford during this time. There's Alice's older sister, Lydia. There's Alice's friend, Ada, who gets a very brief mention in the classic work when Alice is falling down the rabbit hole and she doesn't really know who she is. She mentions that she has a friend, Ada. Gregory Maguire takes that and runs with it. And we also meet Ada's governess, who is trying to hunt down what has happened to Ada. She suspects that Ada is with Alice, so really she's looking for both of the girls. So like I said before, this is a book that takes place both above ground in Oxford and below ground in Wonderland, because Ada has followed Alice into Wonderland. We see her trailing her through Wonderland, meeting some of the characters that Alice has just met. We get to hear Ada's take on all of those different characters. And then above ground, we see Lydia, Alice's older sister, who is out of the house because their father is hosting the very famous Charles Darwin. And then the whole time, Ada's governess is trying to track down the girls, not knowing that they're in Wonderland. It's a lot more serious of a book than the work that inspired it. Not to say that it's a heavy book, I definitely don't mean that. But I mean, just the fact that half of the book is spent up on the surface in Oxford means that it's going to be a whole lot less nonsensical than Lewis Carroll's book was. And also, Ada, the main character of After Alice, she's a little bit older than Alice was. I forget if it was in the first book or the second book, but we're told that Alice is 7.5. Meanwhile, Ada is 10. And that might not seem like a huge difference, but the personality of a 7.5-year-old and the personality of a 10-year-old, for anyone who's worked with kids, they are different. Ada is a lot sassier, she's a lot bossier, and she backtalks a lot of the creatures in Wonderland a whole lot more than the wide-eyed Alice ever did. Gregory Maguire does attempt to capture the whimsy of Lewis Carroll's language, but he also seems to have wanted to write this like a Victorian novel. The whole time I was reading this book, it felt like I was reading an alternate reality Dickens novel, but one that was very self-aware of its place within history. And what I mean by that is that this author writes this book as a Victorian novel that knows it's a Victorian novel, meaning that he's writing it in the style of a Victorian novel, but he as an author has the good fortune of having a lot of distance in time between himself and the time period, so he can make some societal and cultural observations about this period in time, but from far away. Actual Victorian authors wouldn't have had that perspective. I didn't think everything about his use of that style was completely successful, but what I did find really successful in his imitation of Lewis Carroll's style was his inclusion of all of the wordplay. There were so many different moments where something was so clever that I had to stop reading and just smile and shake my head, in the same way that I did when I was reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So my favorite element of those books made it in here, and I was so happy about that. I didn't love this book, not by any means, but I did find it really enjoyable. It does make me kind of sad that its average rating is so low. I think if you go into this book expecting a whimsical retelling of a childhood favorite, then it is probably going to disappoint you. But if you go in looking for a more grown-up, Victorian-esque novel, you might really enjoy it. Well, those were all of the Alice in Wonderland related things that I wanted to discuss with you in this video. Thank you very much for joining me for this unique adventure of my own. If you would like one of the North Avenue candles, click the link below and grab one before March has marched out of town. If you have any comments or questions about anything you've seen in this video or about anything in general, please feel free to put those in the comment section below. If you would like to keep up with what I'm reading and writing about right now, you can find me on social media and other places. The links to everywhere you can find me will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.